Logan Walsh, the youngest billionaire CEO in the long line of Walsh men, found his missing wife on her knees beside a chipped tile floor, scrubbing a roadside diner toilet in a town he had never heard of. And what she said when she looked up was the one sentence in the world that could break him. He had been driving for 6 hours. The board meeting in the next state had been moved to dawn, and his driver had taken the wheel until midnight, when Logan, restless and unable to sleep against the leather of the back seat, had asked to switch. He liked driving. He always had. Driving was the only place where his phone could be ignored without anyone asking why. The interstate had emptied around 3 in the morning, and somewhere past the 2nd County line, he had taken an exit at random for coffee and a stretch. The town was called Riverbend. He had never been to Riverbend. Riverbend was nothing. A single traffic light, a hardware store with a hand-painted sign, a closed bookshop with cardboard taped over a broken pane, and at the end of the short main street, a low brick building whose neon sign read Marigolds in steady, warm orange against the dark. The lights were on. The windows were fogged from the inside. He pulled in. He had been a husband for 11 months. He had been a husband without a wife for 22 months. The arithmetic of it had become a kind of shame he no longer allowed his face to show. He pushed open the diner door. A bell rang above his head. The smell of coffee and bacon grease and old wood folded around him like a coat. A heavy-set woman in a white apron looked up from behind the counter. Her hair was the color of a copper kettle, and her eyes were tired and patient. She nodded once at him. "Sit anywhere, sugar." He took a booth near the back. He ordered coffee and eggs. He drank the coffee. He ate 3 bites of the eggs. He watched the highway through the fogged window and thought about the speech he was supposed to give in 5 hours about a property acquisition he no longer cared about. The waitress was a thin man in his 50s named Carl, according to his name tag, who refilled Logan's cup without asking and called him son. Logan thanked him. He pushed the eggs aside. He needed to wash his hands. He stood and asked Carl where the restroom was. Carl pointed to the back hallway, past a green-painted door and a wall of yellowed photographs. Logan walked past the photographs. He pushed the green door. The hallway was narrow and smelled of bleach and lemon. There were 2 doors at the end. The one on the left had a small black silhouette of a man. The one on the right had a small black silhouette of a woman and a yellow plastic "Cleaning in Progress" sign tilted across the doorway. He pushed the left door. It was a single, small bathroom. Tile floor, tile walls, a single white sink, a single white toilet. Beside the toilet, on her knees on a folded towel, with a yellow plastic bucket of soapy water at her elbow and a green-handled scrub brush in her right hand, was his wife. She had cut her hair. It was shorter than he had ever seen it, just past her chin, and the dark gloss of it was tied back from her face with a pale blue cotton band. She was wearing a faded grey sweatshirt with the sleeves pushed to her elbows, and a pair of soft, worn jeans, and rubber gloves the same yellow as the bucket. There was a smudge of something white on her left cheek. She had lost weight. The line of her wrist was thinner than he remembered. Her hands had stopped moving. She looked up. For a long second, neither of them moved. The fluorescent strip in the ceiling hummed. Somewhere out in the diner, Carl laughed at something Marigold said. The world that he had been holding together for 22 months by force of will and lawyers and a daily public smile slid sideways, in a way he could feel in his knees. "Hazel," he said. She set the brush down on the rim of the bucket, very carefully, as if she were afraid the sound of it touching the plastic might wake somebody. She pulled the rubber glove off her right hand. She did not look away from him. "I was hoping you'd never come," she said. He stood in the doorway, with his hand still on the handle. The yellow "Cleaning in Progress" sign had fallen against his shin. The hallway behind him smelled of bleach and lemon. The fluorescent hummed. He did not know what to do with his face. He did not know what to do with his hands. He had spent 2 years rehearsing every possible sentence she could say to him on the day he found her, and not one of them had been that one. 22 months earlier, Logan Walsh had stood in a hotel suite on the morning after his wedding and lifted the lid of a silver coffee tray and read a single sheet of cream-colored hotel stationery, folded twice, and weighted down with her wedding ring. The note had said, "Don't look for me, please. Forgive me if you can. I love you. H." He had read it 3 times. He had walked to the window. He had looked at the gardens of the resort where they had been married the day before, the white peonies still wired to the trellis, the long stretch of lawn where they had taken the photographs in the sunset light. He had walked back to the tray. He had picked up the ring and closed his hand around it until the pressure of the diamond against his palm hurt. He had called his head of legal, Anita Dorr, and asked her to come to the suite immediately and to tell no one. He had not eaten that day. He had not slept. He had told his mother in the afternoon and his board in the evening, and the next morning he had walked into a press conference and said, calmly, that his wife had been called away by a private family matter and that he would not be answering questions. He had spent the first 6 months of his marriage not married. He had spent the first 6 months of his marriage hiring people. He had hired investigators. He had hired forensic accountants. He had hired a quiet, terrifying woman named Raina who specialized in finding people who did not want to be found. They had searched in 3 countries. They had pulled border crossings. They had checked the small island where her grandmother had lived before she died. They had checked the seaside town where she had once told him, lying with her head on his chest, she had wanted to live one summer of her life. They had checked the Catholic shelter in a city where she had once volunteered as a college student. They had not found her. He had also spent those 6 months being publicly humiliated. The story had broken in the 3rd week. A bellman at the resort had sold a photograph of the empty wedding suite to a tabloid. A bridesmaid had given an unauthorized interview about how Hazel had cried in the dressing room before the ceremony, which Logan had not known. A society columnist had written a long, breezy piece called "The Wife Who Walked," suggesting that Hazel Marsh had simply been a small-town girl out of her depth in a billionaire's house, and had run before she could be sent. Another columnist had suggested she had run with money. Another had suggested a lover. Another had suggested mental illness. Logan had refused to comment. He had attended every single board meeting. He had closed 2 acquisitions. He had taken his mother to the opera in November. He had smiled at the cameras with the steady, measured politeness of a man who had nothing to apologize for. And he had gone home at night to a bedroom that still had her perfume on the pillow, because he had asked the housekeepers, very quietly, never to wash it. After the 1st year, he had stopped hiring investigators. Raina had come to his office in person and sat across his desk and said, "Mr. Walsh, she does not want to be found. I have done everything I know how to do. If she ever wants you to find her, she will leave a door open. Until then, I am taking your money under false pretenses." He had paid her the agreed bonus anyway. He had thanked her. He had walked her to the elevator. He had gone back to his desk and worked until midnight. And now, 22 months after the morning of the cream-colored note, in the bathroom of a diner called Marigold's in a town called Riverbend, his wife had set down a scrub brush and looked up and said, "I was hoping you'd never come." He took 1 step into the small bathroom. He did not know what he was going to do with the step. He just needed to be on her side of the door. "I was on the highway," he said. His voice did not sound like his voice. "I needed coffee." "All right," she said. "Hazel." "All right," she said again, softer. She was still on her knees on the folded towel. Up close, he could see the chapped pink of her knuckles, where the gloves did not quite reach. He could see the hollow under her cheekbone. He could see, on the inside of her left wrist, a thin, pale scar he did not remember, the size and shape of a pencil eraser. He had memorized her wrist once. He had kissed it on the morning of their wedding. in the suite, before the ceremony, while she fastened the back of her dress. There had been no scar there. "Get up," he said. And the second he said it, he hated himself for it, because it sounded like an order, and she had spent 2 years making sure no man could give her one. "Please," he said. "Please get up." She set her gloved hand on the rim of the toilet and pushed herself up. She moved the way a person moves who has been on her knees for a long time. She steadied herself against the sink. She did not look at her reflection. She faced him. She was shorter than he remembered. He realized, after a moment, that it was because she was wearing flat canvas sneakers instead of the heels she had always worn at home. She was thinner. She was tired. She was, in some way he could not name, more alive than the woman who had walked down the aisle on his arm. There was something in the set of her shoulders that had not been there before. She had the quiet of a person who has carried something alone for a very long time and not put it down. "I'm not going to ask you anything yet," he said. "I just need you to know I'm not leaving." She closed her eyes. She nodded once. "Will you come out and sit with me?" he said. "I have an hour and a half left on this shift." "I'll wait." "Logan, I'll wait." She opened her eyes. They were the color he remembered, the soft brown of a river stone, and they were full of something he could not read. "I'm not going anywhere either," she said. "Tonight. I'm not going anywhere tonight. I promise." He walked back out into the hallway. He pulled the green door closed behind him. He stood in the corridor for a moment, with his hand flat against the wall, and then he walked back into the diner and sat down in his booth, and he asked Carl for another cup of coffee, and Carl gave him a long, careful look and poured the coffee, and did not ask any questions. Marigold came out from behind the counter. She wiped her hands on her apron. She came over to his booth. She did not sit down. She stood beside the table with her arms folded. "You found her," she said. "You know." "I know who Hazel Marsh isn't, sugar. I've known for about 1.5 years. "You let her work here." "I gave her a job. She asked for one. She did the work. She still does it. She's the best worker I've had in 20 years, and she has never once asked me for a thing. So yes, I let her work here." He nodded. He looked down at the coffee. The surface of it was trembling slightly. He realized after a moment that his hand was trembling. "I'm going to wait until her shift is over," he said. "All right. And then I'm going to ask her if she'll talk to me." "All right. I'm not going to take her anywhere. I'm not going to call anyone. I'm not going to make a scene." "You don't strike me as the scene-making type, sugar." He looked up at her. Marigold's eyes were tired and patient and not unkind. "She's important to me," he said. "I figured that," Marigold said. "I figured that the first week she walked in here in shoes too big for her and asked if I needed help. People who run the way she ran usually run from something they're trying to forget. She has spent 1.5 years trying not to forget you. I know the difference." He could not answer. He looked back at the coffee. Marigold put one hand on his shoulder, briefly, the way a mother does, and then she went back behind the counter and started running plates for the early shift truckers who were beginning to come in. He sat in the booth for 1 hour and 40 minutes. He watched her work. She came out of the back hallway. She washed her hands at the kitchen sink. She tied a clean apron around her waist. She picked up an order pad and went to a booth where 2 men in highway department coveralls were reading the menu. She smiled at them. She asked them what they wanted. She wrote it down. She told them the omelette was good today. She brought them coffee. She walked the way she had always walked, with her shoulders back and her chin level. But she walked through the diner the way a person walks through her own kitchen. She knew the floor. She knew the customers. She knew where Marigold kept the small carton of cream for the older man at the counter who could not have whole milk. She knew the quick sideways nod that told Carl when an order was ready in the window. She belonged to this room. She did not look at Logan once. He did not look away from her once. When the second hour ended, Marigold rang a small brass bell on the counter and said, loudly enough for the room to hear, "Hazel, darling, you're off. Carl's got the rest." Hazel untied the apron. She folded it. She set it on the counter. She walked over to Logan's booth. She did not sit down. "I live above the hardware store," she said. "It's the green door on the side. There's a fire escape stair. I have to walk because my car is at the bookshop, and I won't have it back until 4. You can walk with me if you want. I would like to wash my face first. I would like to put on a sweater that doesn't smell like bleach. And then we can talk." He stood up. He left 2 20s on the table. He held the diner door open for her. The sky was beginning to grey at the edge. The streetlight at the end of the main street flickered once. They walked side by side, not touching, not speaking, down the empty sidewalk, past the hardware store window with its display of seed packets and lawnmower belts. At the side of the building, she put her hand on the rail of the fire escape and climbed up. He climbed after her. The apartment was 1 room, plus a small kitchenette, plus a smaller bathroom. There was a single bed under a quilt that looked hand-stitched. There was a wooden chair beside a narrow window that faced the alley behind the building. There was a small bookshelf, half empty. There was a kettle. There was no phone. There was no television. There was a framed picture on the windowsill of a woman in a garden, who Logan recognized after a moment as Hazel's grandmother on her father's side, the one who had died when Hazel was 19. There was no picture of him. She filled the kettle. She lit the stove. She told him to sit down in the wooden chair. She went into the bathroom. He heard the water run for a long time. He did not look around. He kept his eyes on his own hands. He had spent 22 months imagining the inside of whatever room she was sleeping in, and it had never looked like this. It had looked like beach houses. It had looked like Mediterranean villas. It had looked like the apartments of unkind men in cities he could not pronounce. It had never once looked like a small, clean room above a hardware store in a town with 1 traffic light. She came out of the bathroom in a clean grey sweater. Her face was scrubbed. Her hair was damp at the ends. She made tea in 2 mismatched mugs. She handed him one. She sat on the edge of the bed across from him, with her knees drawn up under her sweater. She held her mug in both hands. "Ask me anything you want to ask me," she said. "But there is one thing I cannot tell you tonight. I will tell you, I promise I will tell you. But not tonight. Tonight I can only tell you what I can tell you. Why did you leave? That is the thing I cannot tell you tonight. Hazel. Logan. Then tell me whatever you can." She closed her eyes. She breathed in. She breathed out. "I have been here for 1 year and 7 months, she said. "I came here from a town in the next state where I worked for 4 months as a cashier in a feed store. Before that, I worked for 2 months at a laundromat. Before that, I lived in a women's shelter in a city 600 miles from here for about 3 weeks. I left the resort the morning after our wedding because somebody told me something the night before that I could not undo, and could not tell you, and could not stay near you when I tried to fix. I have been trying to fix it ever since. I have not been with anybody else. I have not spent any of your money. I have not spent any of mine that was joint. I have a savings account at the credit union here, under the name on my mother's birth certificate. There is $643 in it. That is everything I own. I clean marigolds 3 days a week. I waited tables until 4 months ago. I work the register at the bookshop on the evenings the owner cannot. I read a great deal. I have not been on the internet in 8 months. I do not have a phone. I have not seen a picture of you in 9. I did not know you were still looking for me. I told myself you had stopped. I needed you to have stopped." He set the mug down on the floor between his feet. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. He did not weep. He had not wept in 22 months. He breathed. "You say there is one thing you cannot tell me tonight," he said. "Yes." "Will you tell me when you can tell me?" "Yes." "Is it a person?" She hesitated. "It is a person," she said. "And it is not a person. It is a set of things one person did to me a long time ago, and that I learned the night before our wedding, and that have been doing things to your name and to mine ever since. I needed to be away from you to fix it. I needed to be a person nobody could find for a year and a half, so I could fix it under a name that nobody could use against you. I am almost done. I am 12 weeks from being done. I need 12 more weeks. Then I will tell you everything. Then you can decide whatever you want to decide." He took his hands away from his eyes. He looked at her. 12 weeks, he said. 12 weeks. "You were going to come back at the end of 12 weeks. She did not answer. "Hazel." "I did not know if I was going to come back," she said. "I was going to be free to decide. For the first time in my life, I was going to be free to decide. I was hoping you would still want me to. I was hoping you would not have moved on. I was hoping I would be brave enough to walk back into your life and ask. I had not decided." "You were going to let me think you were dead for 12 more weeks because you had not decided." "Yes." He stood up. He walked to the narrow window. He looked down at the empty alley. He could see the back of the bookshop from here. He could see the green dumpster behind the hardware store. He could see, very faint, the grey rim of the sky beginning to lighten. "I am not going to ask you to come back," he said after a long time. "I am not going to ask you to come anywhere. I am going to take a room at the inn at the end of the street. I am going to be there. I am going to eat at Marigold's, because that appears to be the only place to eat in this town. I am going to read in the bookshop in the evenings when you are working. I am going to be a customer, and a man who lives at the inn for a while. I am not going to tell anyone. I am not going to call my office for anything that does not need me. I am not going to bring a single person here. I am going to be in this town, and you are going to be in this town. And at the end of 4 months, when you have done whatever it is you have been doing, you are going to make whatever decision you are going to make. And I am going to be where you can find me when you do." She did not speak. He did not turn around. He did not want her to see his face. "Logan." "Hazel." "You don't have to do that." "I am going to do that." "You have a company." "I have a chairman of the board. He has been begging me to take a leave for 2 years. He will be delighted to have me out of the office for 12 weeks. "You have a mother." "My mother has my sister and my sister's children and a great deal of opinions. She will be fine." "You have a life." "I do not have a life. I have a schedule. I had a life. You are her. I am going to wait." He turned around. She was sitting on the edge of the bed with her knees drawn up, and her face very still, and her hands wrapped around the mug. She was not crying. She was looking at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before, an expression that was made of something like surprise, and something like gratitude, and something like fear. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. "Don't tell anyone who you are." "I won't." "Don't bring your driver." "I sent him home an hour ago." "Don't bring your phone into Marigold's." "All right." "Don't tip more than 15%. People notice." "All right." "Don't sit at the counter the first week. Sit at the booths, the counters for the regulars." "All right." "Don't ask Marigold any questions about me. She won't answer them, and she will respect you less for asking." "All right." "Don't tell the woman at the inn what you do for a living. She rents the rooms by the week. She has a son who works on the rigs. You are someone passing through." "All right." "Logan." "Hazel." Thank you for not making me come back tonight." He could not answer that. He nodded once. He walked to the door of the apartment. He set his hand on the knob. He turned back. "Hazel." "Yes?" "I have not slept in our bed once," he said. "I sleep in the guest room. I have not changed the pillowcases. I told the housekeepers not to. They think I am out of my mind. I do not care." She closed her eyes. "Don't tell me things like that yet," she whispered. "Please, Logan, not yet. I will not be able to do what I have to do if you tell me things like that yet." "All right," he said. "All right. I'm sorry." He opened the door. He went down the fire escape. He walked the 4 blocks to the small inn at the end of the street. He paid in cash for 2 weeks. He told the woman at the desk his name was Logan Lewis, and he was a freelance editor on a deadline. He took a room with a single window facing the street. He sat on the edge of the bed in his clothes for an hour, not moving, watching the gray morning light come up over the hardware store across the way. Then he lay down without taking off his shoes, and he slept. He woke at noon. He drove 3 towns over to a hardware store no one in Riverbend would have heard of. He bought work boots, 2 pairs of jeans, 3 plain shirts in dark colors, a brown canvas jacket, a knit watch cap, and a notebook with a black cover. He bought a cheap prepaid phone and put it in the glove compartment for emergencies and turned off his real one. He drove back. He parked at the inn. He hung the new clothes in the small closet. He walked down to Marigold's at 5 in the afternoon, in the dark jeans and the brown jacket and the boots. And he sat in a booth. And he ordered the meatloaf. And he read 3 pages of the notebook he had brought to look like a writer. And Marigold poured his coffee and called him sugar without batting an eye. And Hazel, 3 booths over, taking orders from a family of 4, did not look at him until he got up to leave. And then she met his eyes for 1 long second. And then she went back to writing on her pad. He did this for 3 days. He ate at Marigold's 3 times a day. He sat at booths. He tipped 15%. He did not sit at the counter. He read the local paper. He learned the names of the regulars. He learned that the man who came in at 7 for the Western Omelette was named Earl, and that Earl had a brother in the next county who raised goats. He learned that the woman who came in on Tuesdays at noon with her hair pinned up was named Joan, and that Joan was the postmaster, and that Joan's husband had passed years ago, and Joan now lived alone in the green house behind the church. He learned that the boy who delivered the early papers was named Travis, and that Travis was 12, and that Travis was saving up for a bicycle so he could deliver papers in the next town over too, because his mother needed the money. He learned that Marigold had run the diner for 26 years, since her husband had died and left her with a son to raise, and that her son was now a state trooper 2 hours away. He learned that Hazel was beloved here. She was beloved quietly. She was not the center of any conversation. She was not loud. She was not flirty. She did not cause a fuss. But she was the person Joan came in to see on Tuesdays. And she was the person who slipped a slice of pie into a paper bag for Travis at the end of his paper route on cold mornings. And she was the person Earl asked, gently, on the 3rd day Logan was there, whether his brother's son was doing better in school, because Hazel had apparently been helping the boy with his reading on Sunday afternoons. She was the person Marigold trusted with the keys. She was the person who, on the 4th evening Logan was in the diner, when an older woman at the corner booth had a small dizzy spell and dropped her water glass, was on her feet before Marigold could speak, with a clean cloth from the kitchen and a chair pulled close, and a glass of orange juice, and a soft, warm hand on the woman's wrist, sitting beside her at her own booth and talking to her quietly until the dizziness passed and the woman insisted she was fine, and Hazel walked her to her car and gave her cab fare anyway, in case, and the woman drove home. Logan had paid his bill and was standing by the door, watching this. When Hazel came back inside, he held the door open for her without speaking. She walked past him without speaking. But as she passed, she touched the cuff of his brown jacket, very briefly, with the tips of 2 fingers. Then she went back to work. The bookshop reopened on the 5th day. The owner of the bookshop was a small, severe woman in her 60s named June Whitlock, who wore wool cardigans even in summer and who rationed compliments more carefully than she rationed her stock. June, Logan learned, had broken her wrist 3 weeks earlier and had been closed while she tried to find someone to cover the evenings. Hazel had been the someone for the past 6 months. June, on the morning of the 5th day, hung a small painted sign in the window that said, "Reopening tonight. Welcome back." Logan bought a paperback of 19th century English poetry that afternoon, paid June with cash, and came back at 6 when Hazel was on shift, and sat in the wing chair by the window and read for 2 hours while she shelved books in the back room and rang up the 4 customers who came in. She did not speak to him while he read. He did not speak to her. Once, as she walked past him with an armload of returns from the day before, she set a slim book of letters on the small table beside his chair, without looking at him, and walked on. He picked it up. It was a book of letters by a 19th century English clergyman to his wife during the years he was away from her. He had never read it. He read it that night at the inn until 2 in the morning. He did not know what she meant by it. He thought he knew. He thought he was afraid to assume he knew. He read it again the next day. On the 6th morning, the tabloid reporter arrived. His name was Stuart Quinn, and he was a thin, sandy-haired man in his middle 30s, in an unwrinkled blazer and a careful smile. And he had been writing about Logan Walsh, off and on, for 2 years. He had been the columnist who suggested Hazel had run with money. He had been the columnist who suggested mental illness. He had also been, more recently, the columnist who had begun to suggest, in increasingly pointed paragraphs, that Logan Walsh's quiet, new pattern of cancelled mornings was beginning to look like a man who knew where his missing wife was. A junior stringer he sometimes paid had been parked outside the gates of the Walsh estate the night Logan had taken the wheel from his driver, and had followed the black sedan, at a careful distance, 6 hours up the interstate, to a town with 1 traffic light. Quinn had been in Riverbend since the 3rd day, in a different motel 2 towns over, paying a local boy a small daily sum to walk past the bookshop window with a phone in his pocket. Quinn had a thesis. Quinn was looking for proof. Quinn walked into Marigold's at 9 in the morning on the 6th day. He was carrying a small leather satchel. He sat at the counter. He ordered coffee. He took a long, careful, professional look around the room. Logan was in his usual booth at the back, reading the paper. He did not look up. Marigold had spotted Quinn in the doorway. She put the coffee in front of him without expression. She refilled Earl's cup. She walked back behind the counter and stood, very calm, with her arms folded. "You're not from here," she said. "Just passing through. Most people who pass through don't unsnap their satchel before they sit down." Quinn smiled politely. He took out a phone. He set it on the counter. The screen was on. "I'm a journalist," he said. "I'm doing a small piece on small-town diners that have outlasted the highway era. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions when you have a minute." "Sugar," Marigold said. "I have not had a minute since 1989. Quinn laughed, a thin, polite laugh. He turned slightly on his stool. He looked at Logan, who had not looked up from the paper. He looked at the photograph on the wall behind Logan's booth, an old photograph of a younger Marigold and her late husband on the day they had bought the diner. He looked back at Marigold. "There's a woman who works here," he said. "I was told she might be willing to talk." "Lots of women work here, Sugar. There's 2 on the schedule today." "The one named Hazel." Marigold did not blink. She looked at Quinn for a long second. She poured him another half cup of coffee he had not asked for. "Hazel's not on today," she said. "Funny," Quinn said. "I have a photograph of her here from yesterday afternoon." He swiped his phone. He turned it toward Marigold. Logan, very carefully, lowered the paper. The photograph on the screen was of Hazel walking out of the back of the bookshop with a stack of returns under one arm. It had been taken from across the street. It was unmistakable. "That's not Hazel," Marigold said. "That's Helen. She subs for Miss Whitlock at the bookshop. She lives over in Carter's Pond." "Carter's Pond is 40 miles from here." "She drives in for the shift." "That's a long commute for a bookshop in a town with one traffic light." "Some people like a long drive, Sugar." Quinn smiled. He put the phone away. He drank his coffee. He did not press her further. He paid. He left a $5 tip. He walked out. He stood in the middle of the sidewalk for a long moment, looking up and down the street. And then he got into a small silver rental car parked across from the hardware store, and he drove off. Marigold did not move from behind the counter for a full minute. Then she walked over to Logan's booth. She set both hands flat on the table. "I bought you about an hour, Sugar," she said. "Maybe 2. He'll be back." "I know." "He'll bring a photographer." "I know." "You need to decide, in the next hour, whether you are going to leave town and let her finish what she is doing, or whether you are going to sit beside her in the front window of this diner this morning and let him photograph the both of you, and let the rest of the world decide for itself." Logan thought about it. He folded the newspaper. He set it down. He looked up at Marigold. "Where does she live?" "You know where she lives." "Will you go and bring her here?" "I will go and bring her here." Marigold took her apron off. She walked out of the diner. She came back 12 minutes later with Hazel beside her. Hazel was in jeans and the grey sweater. Her hair was tied back. Her face was very pale. She stopped in the doorway of the diner. She looked at Logan. She looked at the front booth. She looked at the street. "He's going to come back," Logan said. "Marigold thinks within an hour, maybe 2. He has a photograph of you from yesterday afternoon. He's going to bring a photographer next time." "All right," she said. "You can leave. I will sit here. I will tell him you were never here. He will not believe me, but he cannot prove it without you. Marigold has covered for you. He will write what he wants to write, but he will not have his picture. You can be in the next county by lunch. You can come back in 4 months. You can come back to Riverbend, or you can come anywhere else. I will hire someone to drive you. I will not look at where you go." She came over to the booth. She did not sit down across from him. She slid into the booth beside him. She set her hand over his on the formica, between his coffee and his folded newspaper. She did not look at him. "No," she said. "If he is going to come back, he is going to find me sitting next to my husband, eating breakfast in a small diner in a town nobody has heard of, like a wife and a husband who are working through a private thing in private. He can write what he wants. The town will protect us. Marigold will protect us. Nobody who matters here will tell him a thing. And in 4 months, I will come home with you, and I will tell you everything. And we will say whatever there is to say to the rest of them, together. Or I will not, and you will know why. And the rest of them will still not have a story." He turned his hand under hers. He held it. He looked down at the joined shape of their hands on the formica. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. Marigold brought them 2 plates of eggs. She brought toast. She brought fresh coffee. She did not say a word. She went back behind the counter and she rang the small brass bell once, gently, and she went on with her morning. Stuart Quinn came back at 11. He was not alone. There was a young woman with him, with a long-lensed camera. Quinn opened the diner door. He took 2 steps inside. He looked toward the back booth. He saw Logan Walsh, in a brown canvas jacket, sitting beside a thin, dark-haired woman in a grey sweater. He saw their joined hands on the table. He saw Marigold behind the counter with her arms folded. He saw Earl at the counter, and Joan at her usual Tuesday booth, and Carl with a coffee pot, and the 4 men from the highway department who had come in for an early lunch. He did not lift his phone. He did not ask the photographer to lift hers. After a long second, He met Logan's eyes across the room. Logan looked back at him. Logan did not smile. Logan did not glare. Logan looked at him the way a man looks at another man who has finally walked into a room he has been trying to enter for 2 years. Quinn nodded once, slowly. A man acknowledging the end of a chase. He turned to the photographer. He said something quietly. They both walked out. The bell rang as the door closed behind them. Marigold rang the small brass bell on the counter again, gently. The diner exhaled. Earl turned his page. Joan went back to her crossword. Carl refilled the coffee pot. Hazel let out a long, shaky breath. She set her forehead briefly against Logan's shoulder. He set his cheek against the top of her head. They sat like that for a long minute. They did not speak. They did not need to. The story broke that evening. It was small. Quinn did not have a photograph. He did not have a quote. He had only a paragraph saying that an extended source close to the Walsh family had confirmed that Mr. Logan Walsh was, at present, taking time away from his offices, and that he had been observed in private circumstances with a woman believed to be his wife, in an unspecified rural town, in what those close to him described as a private effort at reconciliation. That was all. The story was reposted by other outlets within an hour. Several outlets called the company spokesperson. The company spokesperson, who had been briefed by Anita Dorr 40 minutes after Hazel had said yes to sitting beside Logan in the booth, said only that the Walsh family considered this a private matter and would have no further comment. By morning, the news cycle had moved on to a hedge fund scandal in another city, and Riverbend was still, by name, unspecified. Hazel lost her shifts at the bookshop the next morning anyway. June Whitlock did not call her. June Whitlock left a note tucked under the doorknob of the apartment above the hardware store. The note was short. Hazel, dear, I am so sorry. I had a phone call from a young man this morning who knew rather a lot about my finances. I cannot have him in my shop. I cannot have him outside my shop. I am closing in the evenings until further notice. I will pay you for next week. Please come and see me when this is over. With love, J.W. Hazel read the note sitting on the top step of the fire escape with Logan beside her. She handed it to him. He read it. He folded it. He gave it back. I will fix that, he said. No, she said. You will not. June is 68. She is alone in that shop. She has every right to be afraid. I will go and see her later this morning, and I will tell her I am stepping back from the bookshop until I am back in my own house. I will help her find a replacement. I will not let you fix it by buying her shop, Logan. I see you thinking it. He almost smiled. I was thinking it. I know you were. Hazel. Yes. At the diner, with Quinn, when he came in. Yes. I have never in my life been more proud to sit next to anybody. She looked at him. Her eyes were full. She did not cry. She set her hand against the side of his face for a second. She let her hand drop. I have to go to work, she said. She went to work. He went back to his room at the inn. He called Anita Dorr. He told her, in 3 sentences and no more, where he was, that he had found her, that she was safe, that she would be home with him in 4 months, and that until then he was not coming back to the office, and he was not taking calls. He told her to handle the press. He told her to handle the board. He told her to handle his mother. He told her that if there was a true emergency, she could leave a message at a small inn at a number he would give her, and that he would call her back from a payphone within the day. He told her to tell no one where he was. Anita Dorr, who had been head of legal for the family company for 13 years, and who had been the only person in the suite the morning of the cream-colored note, listened in silence. When he was done, she said, very quietly, Logan, dear, I am so glad. And she said, Take all the time you need." And she said, "I will hold the line." He spent the next 11 days learning the shape of a life he had never lived. He woke at 6. He walked to Marigold's. He had coffee at a booth. He read the paper. He left when Hazel came on shift. He walked the length of the main street and the 2 blocks behind it. He learned the alleys. He learned the sounds of the town at different hours. He learned that the church bell rang at noon and at 6, and that the train whistle in the next county over could be heard, faintly on still mornings, around 4. He went into the hardware store. He bought a small brass nail in a paper envelope so that he would have a reason to be there. He stood for 10 minutes in the aisle of garden seeds and read the names. He had never planted anything in his life. He went back to his room. He read. He called Anita Dorr twice from the payphone in the parking lot of a gas station in the next town. He sat in the booth at Marigold's again at lunch. He ate dinner there, too. Some evenings he walked Hazel home from the diner, 4 blocks of empty sidewalk, neither of them speaking. Her hand sometimes through the crook of his elbow, and sometimes not. He went back to the inn alone. On the 12th day, the small grease fire happened. It was an ordinary Tuesday lunch. The diner was full. Joan was at her usual booth. Earl was at the counter. There were 2 truckers eating chicken fried steak. There was an older couple in the back booth, the woman in a violet hat, the man bald and patient. There was a young mother with a toddler in a high chair. Logan was in his booth with the local paper. Marigold was at the grill. Carl had stepped out back to bring in a delivery of milk. The flame jumped from the grease pan when Marigold lifted the basket out of the deep fryer. It was the kind of small, ordinary kitchen fire that happens once every 2 years in a working diner. It caught the towel on the rail. The towel went up with a soft, yellow whoosh. Marigold reached for the wall extinguisher, and her hand closed on the bracket, and the bracket came off the wall in her palm. The bracket had been screwed in, badly, 15 years ago, after the previous owner. The extinguisher hit the floor. The fire on the towel doubled. The smoke alarm began to scream. Hazel, who had been carrying 2 coffees to Joan's table, set the coffees down on the nearest empty booth without spilling them. She walked, did not run, into the kitchen. She picked up the extinguisher from the floor. She pulled the pin. She aimed at the base of the towel and the rail, and she discharged the canister in 3 short, controlled bursts. The fire went out. She set the extinguisher back down. She walked to the back wall. She pulled the alarm reset. The screaming stopped. She walked to the front of the diner. She raised her voice slightly, only slightly, and she said, "Friends, we are fine. The fire is out. The kitchen will be closed for half an hour while we air it out. Anything that is already on the table is yours and on the house. Anything you have not gotten yet, please come back at 2. Please go on out the front door and not the back." The diner stood up, quietly. Hazel walked to the back booth. She knelt beside the older couple. She helped the woman out of the booth and to her feet, with one steady hand under the woman's elbow. She walked them to the door. She held it open. She helped the young mother lift the toddler out of the high chair. She handed Earl his hat from the rack. She thanked Joan for being patient. She closed the door behind the last of them. She propped the door open with a brick. She pulled open the back door at the far end of the kitchen. She pulled open the side door by the alley. She turned on the exhaust fan. She turned to Marigold, who was standing very still beside the grill, with her hand still around the broken bracket, and she said, gently, "Honey, sit down. Carl will be back in a minute. The extinguisher needs replacing. I'll call the supply company. The bracket needs to be re-anchored. I'll call Travis's father. He does that work. The towel rail will need to be sanded. I can do that myself tonight. The insurance form is in the binder under the register. I'll fill out the first page. Are you all right?" Marigold sat down on the stool beside the prep counter. She set the bracket on the counter beside her. She looked at Hazel. She did not say anything for a long second. You are a wonder, Hazel Marsh, she said, finally. I am a person with a list of phone numbers, honey. Go drink some water. Logan, who had stood up at the moment Marigold reached for the extinguisher, and who had not moved since, walked very slowly through the empty diner and into the kitchen. He stood in the doorway. He looked at his wife. She was wiping her hands on a clean cloth. She had a smudge of foam on her sleeve. Her hair had come slightly loose from the band. She looked, for the first time since he had found her, at peace. "Where did you learn to do that?" he said. She did not look up from her hands. "Marigold made me practice once a month for a year. She said you could not work in her kitchen without knowing how to put out the worst thing the kitchen could do to you." "Hazel." "Yes." "I have never seen you do anything like that before." "You never had occasion to." "Did you know how to do that before you left?" "No," she said. "I did not know how to do anything before I left, Logan. I knew how to be looked at, and I knew how to be polite. That was almost everything I knew how to do. I have learned the rest in 2 years." She finally looked up. There was no defensiveness in her face. There was only that strange, new, still gravity, the woman who had carried something alone for a very long time and put it down for a moment and picked it back up again. "Marigold," she said without turning, "we should let Logan help with the insurance form. He is good with paperwork." Marigold laughed weakly from the stool. "Sugar, I'd let your husband sit at my counter and stuff envelopes for free if you asked me to." "I am asking." That night, after the diner had been cleaned, and the bracket reattached, and the towel rail sanded, and the extinguisher replaced, and the insurance form filled out and signed, Logan and Hazel walked back to the inn. They did not walk to the apartment above the hardware store. He had not asked. She had not offered. They walked to the inn. He stopped at the door. She looked at him. "Will you sit on the porch with me for a few minutes?" she said. The porch of the inn was small and had 2 wicker chairs. They sat. The street was empty. The streetlight at the end of the road flickered, as it had flickered every night since he had been there. "Logan." "Yes?" "There are things I want to tell you tonight that are not the thing I cannot tell you yet. I want to tell you the small things. I want you to know what I have been since I left. I think I owe you that much tonight, after today." "You don't owe me anything." "Let me tell you anyway." She told him. She told him about the women's shelter in the city 600 miles away, and the kindness of the woman who ran it. She told him about the day she had been given a paper bag of donated clothes and had cried in a stall for half an hour because nothing in the bag fit, and she had not known how to ask for a different size. She told him about the laundromat job and the blistered hands. She told him about the night she had been so tired she had fallen asleep folding sheets, and the manager had walked her to her bus and not docked her pay. She told him about the feed store and the older man who had taught her, with great patience, how to use the cash register and how to lift a 50-pound bag of dog food without hurting her back. She told him about Marigold. She told him about the day she had walked into the diner with $32 in her pocket and asked for any work. She told him how Marigold had looked at her for a long moment and told her to come back at 6 in the morning and to bring shoes she could stand in for 10 hours. She told him about the bookshop and June Whitlock and the slow stack of books on her shelf. She told him about Travis and the pie. She told him about Joan and the Tuesdays. She told him about the grandmother in the picture and how she had carried the picture in her bag through every shelter and every motel. It was the only thing she had taken from the resort the morning she left, besides the clothes she had been wearing and a single envelope of cash she had taken from her own bedside drawer. She told him she had loved him every single day. He sat with his hands folded between his knees. He listened. He did not interrupt. When she was done, he said, after a long moment, "I have loved you every single day too." "I know," she said. "You said earlier. You said you needed me to have stopped looking." "I did." "You don't anymore." "No," she said. "I don't anymore." He walked her to the foot of the fire escape. He did not climb up with her. He waited until she had gotten to the top and unlocked the green door, and looked back down at him. And then he raised one hand to her and turned around and walked back to the inn. He went up to his room. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He took off the brown jacket. He folded it. He set it on the chair. He picked up the small book of letters from the bedside table. He read one letter. He set the book down. He closed his eyes. He thought of his wife on her knees, on the folded towel beside the chipped tile, looking up. He thought of his wife standing in front of a kitchen fire, with the extinguisher steady in her hands. He thought of his wife crying in a stall over donated clothes that did not fit. He thought of the 4 months that lay between him and the things she could not tell him yet. He thought, I can wait 4 months. I can wait 4 years if she needs. I can wait whatever she needs. He slept for the first time in 22 months without the dream. The things she could not tell him became tellable on the 20th day. It came not through her work, but through his. On the night of the grease fire, sitting up at the small desk in his room at the inn, he had turned over in his mind the single sentence Hazel had given him that first night above the hardware store. A thing one person had done to her a long time ago, and that had been doing things to your name and to mine ever since. To your name. He had spent 2 years assuming she had run from a person. He had not, until that night, sat with the other half of the sentence, that whatever it was, had been doing things to his name. The next morning he had begun, very quietly over the payphone, to ask Anita Dorr to pull certain old paperwork. He had not told her why. He had told her only that he wanted, for personal reasons, a complete catalogue of every small entity that had ever been registered with any of his signatures or notary stamps, going back 5 years. He had told her to take her time. He had told her to be discreet. He had told her not to involve any of the regular outside firms. Anita Dorr, who had been head of legal for 13 years and who knew every shape a discreet inquiry could take, had quietly assembled the catalogue herself, working at home in the evenings, with 2 associates who reported to her alone. On the morning of the 20th day, she called the payphone in the gas station parking lot at the time he had told her she could call. She told him she had a draft of the catalogue ready. She asked him what address she could send it to. He did not give her the inn. He gave her the address of a small private mailbox shop in the next town, where he had rented a box under the name Logan Lewis. He drove out the next morning. He picked up a brown manila envelope. He drove back to the inn. He sat at the small desk in his room. He read the catalogue. It was 83 pages long. Most of it was ordinary. Most of it was what he expected. The small foundations he had set up in his early 20s, the property-holding entities for his city apartment and his country house, the family trust shells from his grandfather's estate. There were 3 he did not recognize. They were nested. The outermost was registered in a state he had never done business in. The second was registered in another state he had never done business in. The third, the innermost, was a holding company that owned what looked, on first reading, like a small chain of 3 commercial laundries in 3 different cities. He read the registration paperwork for the outermost shell. The signatures on it were his. The notary stamp was a stamp that had been in the resort suite the day before his wedding, the day the resort had brought up a small portable notary kit so that he and Hazel could sign a few pre-prepared estate planning documents in advance of the ceremony. He remembered the notary kit. He remembered signing what he had been told were estate documents. He remembered Hazel sitting at the little desk beside him, signing what she had been told were the same documents. He remembered the resort lawyer who had come up with the kit. The resort lawyer had been a quiet man in a grey suit who had presented his credentials and the documents in a leather portfolio. The resort lawyer had not been the resort's lawyer. The resort lawyer's name on the registration paperwork was a name Logan did not know. He read the second shell. He read the third. The pattern was clear. Whoever had brought the notary kit to the suite that morning had used the signatures and the notary stamp to register, on the back pages of the documents Logan and Hazel had been signing, 3 nested entities that ultimately held a small but real cash flow business. The cash flow business, 3 commercial laundries, had over the past 2 years been moving small but consistent amounts of money through bank accounts in 3 states. The pattern of those movements, even to Logan's untrained eye, was the pattern of something that wanted to look legitimate and was not. It was the kind of structure that would, if it ever were noticed by the right kind of investigator, look exactly like a small private money laundering operation that the chairman of a major holding company had quietly set up under his own name and the maiden name of the wife who had then conveniently disappeared. He closed the catalogue. He sat very still at the desk for a long minute. He understood, finally, what Hazel had been doing for 22 months. He understood why she had not been able to tell him. He understood why she had needed to be a person nobody could find. He walked to the diner. It was 3 in the afternoon, the slow hour. Marigold was wiping down the counter. Hazel was at the back booth, polishing the salt shakers. He walked to the back booth. He sat down across from her. He set the manila envelope on the table between them. "Hazel," he said. She looked at the envelope. She set down the salt shaker she had been polishing. She set down the cloth. "You found it," she said. "I found it. Anita pulled it for me. She does not know what it is. She knows only that I asked her to pull every entity registered with my signatures going back 5 years. She is the only person at the company who knows I asked. She will not say a word." "All right. Tell me, Hazel." She took a long breath. She let it out. "My stepfather," she said. "His name was Carlton Pierce. He married my mother when I was 9. He died in a house fire when I was 12. He did not die in a house fire when I was 12. I learned that the night before our wedding." She looked down at the table. She looked at the envelope. She looked back up. "I learned that the night before our wedding, because he came to the resort. He came up to the suite at 1 in the morning. I was alone. I had sent the bridesmaids home an hour before. I was sitting at the dressing table in my robe, trying to write something in my journal that would feel worth saying on the morning of my wedding." She closed her eyes for a moment, the way a person does when the memory has its own weight. He knocked. I opened the door because I thought it was room service. He walked in. He sat down on the love seat. He told me he was alive. He told me he had been alive for 15 years. He told me he had been watching me for 15 years. Her hands had folded themselves together in her lap without her noticing. The afternoon light through the diner window had moved an inch across the laminate of the table. He told me that he had been the person who had paid for my college, through a foundation I had thought was a scholarship from my late father's employer. He told me that he had been the person who had arranged for me to be at the charity dinner where I met you. He told me that he had been the person who had introduced your mother to my mother through a third party at a museum gala 4 years before that, so that the names would be in front of each other when the time came. She looked up at Logan. Her voice did not change, but something in her face did. He told me that I had been raised, since I was 12, to be where you would be when the time came. He told me that I had not chosen any of it. He told me that he had chosen all of it for me. She paused. She put both hands flat on the table. She drew her hands back into her lap. She was looking at the formica between them now, but her gaze was not on the formica. Her gaze was somewhere 15 years away. He told me that in the morning, after the wedding, a man would arrive at the suite with a notary kit and a leather portfolio of documents that he, Carlton, had prepared. He told me that you and I would sign the documents. He told me that the documents would, on their face, be ordinary estate planning instruments. He told me that the back pages of the documents would, in fact, register 3 nested entities that he had been preparing for years. Her voice did not waver, but the tendon at the side of her neck did. Logan watched the small movement of it. He did not interrupt. Those entities, he said, would begin the week after the wedding to receive and move money through 3 small commercial laundries he had bought in 3 states over the past decade. He chose those laundries because they ran on cash, and because nobody asks careful questions of the man who washes the sheets for the second-best motel in a county nobody visits. The entities would be registered with our signatures and the resort notary stamp, so that the paper trail would look as if you and I had set them up ourselves on the morning of our wedding. Marigold, behind the counter, slid a pot of water onto a back burner without looking up. The kitchen door swung once and was still. I was not to say anything to you. If I said anything to you, the entities would still be registered, but he would, through other channels, ensure that the registrations were noticed by the kind of investigator who notices such things, within the year. You would then be ruined. He would not be ruined, because he was, on paper, dead. She finally looked up. Her eyes were dry, her hands were not. He told me he was not going to ask anything of me except my silence. He wanted me to remain married to you, to remain quiet, to live the life he had chosen for me, and to allow him to use the marriage and the registrations as he had planned. If I did this, he would never come to the door again, and you would never know. If I did anything else, he would ruin you. He would let me think about it overnight. Logan set both palms flat on the table between them and did not move them. He stood up. He walked to the door. He turned around. He smiled at me. He told me he had loved me very much when I was a small girl, and that he hoped I would come to understand in time that this was the only way he had ever known how to give a daughter a life. Then he left. She stopped. She did not look down. She kept her eyes on Logan's face. I sat in the dressing chair until morning. I did not write anything in the journal. I did not sleep. I thought about waking you. I thought about waking your mother. I thought about calling the police. Every version ended the same way. She spread her fingers flat on the table for a moment, then drew them back. He had told me, on his way out, that the entities had already been drafted, that the back page registrations had already been printed, and that if I made any sound at all, the man with the kit would simply forge the signatures and notarize them anyway, and then make sure the trail was found. A spoon clinked behind the counter. Neither of them looked up. The signatures were going to be on the registrations either way. The only question was whether they would be real or forged. If they were real, I would know exactly what they said and where they had gone, and I would have a chance, working backward under another name, to undo them cleanly. If they were forged, I would never know which papers, which states, which laundries. I chose to know. Logan said nothing. He kept his eyes on her hands. At 6 in the morning, the man with the notary kit arrived. I let him in. You came in from your room across the hall. You signed the documents. I signed the documents. I made myself memorize the order in which they were signed, and the cover sheets and the little gold stamp on the leather portfolio. The man left. You went down to your suite to dress. Her voice thinned to almost nothing on the next sentence, and then steadied. I went into the bathroom and was sick. I came out. I packed a single small bag. I left the note on the silver tray. I took the cash from my bedside drawer. I went out the service entrance of the resort. I caught a bus from the gas station 2 miles down the road. I rode that bus for 36 hours. She lifted her eyes to his. I walked into a women's shelter in a city 600 miles away. I gave them the only name nobody could trace, my mother's maiden name from her birth certificate, Marsh. I started, that morning, to think about how to undo the thing he had done. She paused again. She had thought about the legal pieces of it, she said, for the first 4 months at the shelter, while her hands learned to cope with bleach and with the cold water rinse cycles of the laundromat across the alley. She used the public library hour at the branch behind the shelter every afternoon. She read corporate codes the way other women read paperback novels. She read until the words made shapes she could draw on the back of a napkin, and then she drew them. And then she folded the napkins into the spine of her grandmother's cookbook and carried them in her bag from city to city. She finally said it slowly, looking at the envelope on the table between them. The only way to dissolve the three entities cleanly, without you ever appearing as the person dissolving them, was for me, under my mother's maiden name, to file procedural dissolutions in each of the three states, citing a clerical fraud in the registration. Because the back page signatures had been registered in my maiden name, not in Walsh, the dissolutions could be filed by me under my mother's maiden name, with affidavits stating that the signatures had been obtained through a fraud at the resort the morning of my wedding. She picked up a salt shaker. She put it down. She picked it up again. She turned it slowly between her fingers as she spoke, the way another woman might turn a rosary. The dissolutions would not name you. They would not require you to testify. They would not, if the affidavits were filed correctly and at the right intervals, ever bring your name into the record at all. They would simply unwind the three entities. The cash flow business, the three laundries, would, when the entities were dissolved, revert to a small probate court in the state where Carlton had nominally been administered 15 years ago. The probate court would receive the laundries as orphan assets. They would be sold at fair value. The proceeds, after fees, would go to the state. Logan understood now why she had been writing on a typewriter at a thrift store table for 20 months. He understood why she had not let a single electronic record of her name touch a single document. He felt, for the first time, the shape of the careful rope bridge she had been building across the dark beneath them. Carlton would be exposed, on paper, as the actual owner, because the dissolution affidavits would name him. He would, by the time the affidavits were filed, have to surface or remain dead. If he surfaced, he would face the prosecutors. If he remained dead, the laundries would be sold and the structure would simply end. And you have been filing them? I have been filing them. The first dissolution took 14 months to prepare. I filed it the month before I came to Riverbend. The second took 9 months, because the second state required a different sequence of affidavits. I filed it 3 months ago. The third has taken 4 months, because the third state requires a hearing, and I had to be ready to appear at the hearing in person under the maiden name, without anyone connecting me to you. The hearing is in 9 weeks. After the hearing, the third entity will be dissolved. Carlton will then have, at most, a few months before the prosecutors who specialize in these sorts of structures begin to notice the trail. He will surface, or he will remain dead. Either way, you will be untouched. I will be untouched. The marriage will be untouched. We will have been a husband and wife who quietly separated for 2 years and quietly reconciled. That is the story. That is the entire story. That is why I could not tell you. That is why I could not let you find me. If anyone had connected the woman filing the dissolutions to the wife of Logan Walsh, the affidavits would have been challenged. The dissolutions would have been blocked. The entities would have remained on the books in your name. He would have ruined you anyway. He sat very still. He looked at the manila envelope on the table. 9 weeks, he said. 9 weeks. You have been doing this alone for 22 months. Yes. Without a phone. Without a phone, without a lawyer, with 3 months of public library legal research and 3 months of evening law school continuing education courses I audited in the city near the second shelter, and 20 months of writing my own affidavits on a typewriter I bought at a yard sale. Hazel. Yes. Why did you not come to me? She looked at him for a very long time. Because you would have stopped me, she said. I would not have stopped you. You would have stopped me, Logan. You would have hired a man to do it instead of me. You would have hired 6 men. You would have flown a team of attorneys to each of the 3 states. You would have made it about you. You would have made it about the company. You would have made it about your name. And the moment you had, the back pages of those documents would have started a paper trail that would have walked from the dissolutions back to your office. The only reason this works is that the woman dissolving them is a woman with no last name, and no phone, and no permanent address, and no connection on paper to anybody. The moment the woman dissolving them is the wife of Logan Walsh, the moment is over. He understood. He understood it with a kind of cold, clean clarity that took the breath out of him for a second. She was right. She had been right for 22 months. She had been right the morning of the cream-colored note. She had been right every day since. She had been right in every shelter, in every laundromat, in every cash payment she had taken in cash so that there would be no electronic trail, in every pseudonym she had used on every form. She had not been running from him. She had been doing the only thing that could be done. She had been the only person in the world who could do it. And she had been doing it alone. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes again. He breathed. Hazel, Logan, I'm not going to say I would have done better. All right. I'm not going to say I deserve any of this. All right. I am going to say one thing, and I'm going to say it once, and then I'm going to ask you a question, and then I am going to do whatever you tell me to do. All right. You are the bravest person I have ever known. I have spent 22 months building a story about why you had left me, and I have never in any of the stories let you be the person you actually are. I am sorry. I am sorry for the stories. I am sorry I was not the kind of husband who, when a stranger walked into our suite at 1 a.m. the night before our wedding, you trusted to handle it with you. I am sorry that what I built around us made it more useful for you to disappear than to stay. I am asking you to forgive me, when you can, for that. She was crying now. She was crying without sound, with her hands flat on the table and her shoulders perfectly still, and the tears slipping down both sides of her face and onto her sleeves. She did not lift a hand to wipe them. She let them fall. Logan. Yes. There is nothing to forgive. There is. There is nothing to forgive. He took her hands. He held them. The salt shakers and the cloth lay between them. The diner was empty. Marigold, behind the counter, had quietly turned the open sign to closed at some point in the past hour, without saying a word. My question, he said. Yes. What can I do in the next 9 weeks that will not put any of it at risk? She wiped her face with her sleeve. She thought. You can stay here, she said. You can stay in the inn. You can be Logan Lewis, the freelance editor on a deadline. You can be a man visiting his wife in a small town, quietly, without press, until I come home with you. You can keep Anita where she is. You cannot, under any circumstances, hire any new lawyers. You cannot, under any circumstances, look any further into the catalogue. You can put the catalogue in a safe deposit box and forget about it. You can let me drive to the 3rd state alone for the hearing. I will be back the same evening. You cannot come with me, no matter how much you want to. You can be here the night I come back. You can be at the inn. You can be at the diner. You can be in the wing chair at the bookshop if June Whitlock has reopened by then, which I suspect she will have. You can be anywhere I can find you. After the hearing, I will come home with you. That is all. That is all. Hazel. Yes. I love you. I love you, Logan. The 9 weeks passed slowly and quickly, the way such weeks pass when there is nothing to do but wait and live. He stayed at the inn for the first 5 of them, and ate at Marigold's, and read in the wing chair at the bookshop on the evenings June Whitlock had reopened. June reopened in the 3rd week. She did so after Hazel went to her with a careful, private explanation, and a promise that there would be no more reporters, ever. June wept once, briefly, into a paper napkin behind the counter, and then made a pot of tea and reopened the next evening. He learned the regulars. He learned the names of the children who came in for popsicles in the late afternoons. He learned the small tasks of the diner, how Marigold liked the dishes stacked, where Carl kept the spare aprons, which booth Joan preferred when the morning sun was bright and which she preferred when it was overcast. He helped with the insurance form follow-up. He fixed the bracket on the new extinguisher himself, with the level and the right anchors, after Travis's father walked him through it patiently in the back room. Marigold called him Sugar. Joan learned his real name in the 4th week, from a small, careful conversation in a back booth with both Logan and Hazel. She never repeated it to anyone. She continued to call him Logan Lewis when other people were in the diner, and Logan when they were not. Travis, who never learned his real name, asked Logan once whether Logan would help him fix the chain on his bicycle. Logan, who had never fixed a bicycle chain in his life, sat down on the curb beside Travis with a small wrench and a jar of grease and figured it out, with Travis's patient instruction, in 20 minutes. He paid for the chain. Travis insisted on paying him back out of his paper route money. Logan insisted on accepting the money in exact change. Travis was satisfied. Logan, on the walk back to the inn, found that he was smiling. He called his mother once a week from the gas station payphone. He did not tell her where he was. He told her that he was well, and that he was working on something private, and that he would explain everything when he came home. His mother, who was not a woman who wept in front of her children, wept very briefly on the second call, and then composed herself, and told him to come home when he could. He said he would. He meant it. He called Anita Daw twice a week. Anita had, over the course of those weeks, very quietly retrieved the original notary records from the resort, through a private inquiry that left no public footprint. The resort had been, 12 years ago, before it was acquired by its current owner, owned by a small holding entity that had eventually been wound up in a bankruptcy. The portable notary kit that had been used in the suite the morning of the wedding had been signed out, on the morning of the wedding, to a man whose credentials, on examination, turned out to have been forged. The man had not been a resort lawyer. The man had been an associate of Carlton Pierce. Anita filed the resort records away in a private vault. She did not, on Logan's instruction, do anything with them. She simply held them. She told Logan that, whenever the moment was right, she would have everything ready. Logan thanked her. He told her again to take care of his mother and the company, and to not, on any account, breathe a word. In the 5th week, one of the associates Anita had been working with very quietly received an unusual phone call from a man who introduced himself as a journalist working on a piece about offshore laundering structures, who wanted to ask the firm's spokesperson a few questions about 3 small entities he had been looking into. The associate, who had been briefed by Anita in a single, careful sentence, told the journalist that the firm did not, as a matter of policy, comment on entities outside its publicly disclosed registry, and ended the call. Anita called Logan that evening from her own home. She told him about the call. She told him she did not believe the journalist was a journalist. She told him she suspected someone was beginning to try to push the story sideways. She told him to tell Hazel. He told Hazel that night, on the porch of the inn. Hazel listened. She was very still. She said, "He is panicking. He has felt the 2nd dissolution. He is trying to make the 3rd one harder by raising the temperature of the press around your name. We cannot let him. The 3rd hearing is in 4 weeks. If anyone connects me to you in the next 4 weeks, the 3rd hearing will be challenged. It is a procedural state. The judge will pause everything if there is a public challenge." Logan thought. He looked at her. "I will go back," he said. "What?" "I will go back to the city. I will go back tomorrow. I will appear at the office. I will issue a statement. I will give an interview, a careful one, to a friendly reporter about my time away. I will tell them that I have been traveling alone in Europe. I will say nothing about you. I will draw the press eye back to me in the city for the next 4 weeks. I will be photographed at a board meeting. I will be photographed at the opera with my mother. I will be photographed in our city apartment, alone. I will give the man who is trying to push the story sideways nothing to push. I will be the most boringly visible billionaire in the city for 4 weeks. Then, the morning after your hearing, when the third entity is dissolved, I will quietly come back here and bring you home. Hazel was quiet for a long time. You would do that, she said, finally. I would do that. You would walk back into the city alone. After all of this, after today, knowing I am here, knowing the hearing is in 4 weeks, knowing I am alone at the apartment above the hardware store, knowing I will be alone for the hearing. Yes. She set her hand over his on the wicker arm of the chair. All right, she said. Go. He left the next morning at dawn. He drove back. He walked into the offices of Walsh Brennan Partners at 10 in the morning of the next day. The chairman of the board, who had been waiting for him for 2 months, embraced him in the lobby in front of 3 startled assistants. Logan apologized to the chairman. The chairman said there was nothing to apologize for. He told Logan to take the corner office for the rest of the week and to do whatever he needed to do. Logan called a small, careful list of friendly reporters. He gave one of them a 30-minute interview at the office. He said he had been traveling. He said he had needed time. He said he was back. He said his wife was a private matter that he would not be discussing. He said his mother was in good health. He said the company was in good hands. He went to a board meeting. He was photographed at a board meeting. He went to the opera with his mother. He was photographed at the opera with his mother. He was photographed in the lobby of his city apartment. He was photographed at a charity luncheon. He was the most boringly visible billionaire in the city for 4 weeks. The man who had called Anita's associate did not call again. The story did not run. On the morning of the third hearing, Hazel drove 400 miles in the beat-up sedan to the third state. She wore a plain, dark suit she had bought at a thrift store. She carried a folder of affidavits she had typed herself. She walked into a small county courthouse. She gave the clerk her mother's maiden name. She signed in. She waited on a wooden bench in the hall for an hour and a half. Her name was called. She walked into a small, wood-paneled courtroom. She gave testimony for 11 minutes. The judge read the affidavits. The judge asked her 2 questions. She answered them. The judge granted the dissolution. The hearing ended in 24 minutes. She walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon. She drove 400 miles back. She arrived at the apartment above the hardware store at 1 in the morning. She slept for 9 hours, the longest she had slept in 22 months. The next afternoon, Logan drove back to Riverbend. He drove the same 6 hours. He took the same exit. He drove down the same main street with its single traffic light. He pulled into the parking lot of Marigold's. He walked in. The bell rang above his head. The smell of coffee and bacon grease and old wood folded around him like a coat. Marigold looked up from behind the counter. She was smiling. "Sit anywhere, sugar," she said. He took his usual booth. Carl brought in coffee. Joan, at her usual Tuesday booth, raised her cup at him in salute. Earl, at the counter, said welcome back. Travis, who had been folding napkins in the corner, because his bicycle was in the shop and his mother had asked Marigold to keep him busy after school, ran over and hugged Logan around the waist and ran back to the napkins. Hazel came out of the back hallway. She was wearing the grey sweater. Her hair was pulled back. She had a small smile on her face. The smile of a person who has put down something heavy and has no intention of picking it back up. She walked over to his booth. She sat down across from him. "Hello," she said. "Hello," he said. "It is over." It is over. She reached across the table. She took his hand. She held it. Will you come home with me? He said. Yes, she said. When? Tomorrow. I have to give Marigold a week's notice. I have to say goodbye to Joan and Earl and Travis and June. I have to pack the apartment. There is not very much to pack. Tomorrow I will start. By the end of the week I will be ready. Marigold is going to keep the apartment for the next go. She has someone in mind, a young woman who is not unlike the woman who walked into Marigold's 18 months ago with $32 in her pocket. The next girl will need it. All right. And Logan. Yes. We are not going to leave Riverbend behind. I'm not going to be a woman who stayed here for a year and a half because nobody knew her, and then left because she did not need anybody anymore. I owe these people more than that. We are going to come back. We are going to come back as often as we can. I want to be here for Joan's birthday in October. I want to be here for the bookshop's reopening dinner that June is finally going to throw next month. I want to be here for the Christmas pageant, where Travis is going to be a shepherd and forget 2 of his 3 lines and refuse to admit it. I want to spend the quietest weeks of every summer here. I want a small house here eventually, not a big one, a small one. A small one with a porch and a garden and a guest room for Marigold when she retires, and a back door to a yard where Travis can keep his bicycle and do his homework on Sunday afternoons. Will you do that with me? Yes. All right. Hazel? Yes. I love you. I love you, Logan. They were married for 1 day and 22 months and a single Tuesday afternoon, and the rest of their lives. The story, when it eventually came out very small. Anita Dorr sat with Logan and Hazel in the conference room of Walsh Brennan Partners, 6 weeks after Hazel came home. She prepared a single, short statement. The statement confirmed only that the Walsh family had quietly resolved a private matter involving a fraudulent registration of 3 small commercial entities under fraudulent signatures. It noted that the entities had been dissolved through ordinary procedural channels in the relevant states. It noted that no public allegations were being made against any party. The statement did not name Carlton Pierce. The statement did not name Hazel Walsh. Carlton Pierce, somewhere, took whatever steps a quiet ghost takes when his structures are unwound, and his daughter has refused to be his vehicle. He did not, ever, contact Hazel again. He did not, ever, contact Logan. The probate court in the state where he had nominally been administered 15 years ago did, in due course, sell the 3 small commercial laundries at fair value, and the proceeds, after fees, did, in due course, go to the state. 2 prosecutors in 2 states did, in their own quiet way and on their own quiet schedules, begin to make small, careful inquiries into the patterns the dissolutions had revealed. None of those inquiries ever touched Logan Walsh. None of them ever touched Hazel Walsh. They touched, eventually, a man whose name was not Carlton Pierce, and whose nominal demise the prosecutors began, very slowly, to question. What became of him after that was a matter for prosecutors and for the long, slow grinding of the law, and not for Logan and Hazel, who had, by then, a life to live. A year later, Logan and Hazel lived in Riverbend half the year and the city the other half. They bought a small white house at the end of the lane behind the bookshop, with a porch and a garden and a guest room for Marigold when she retired, and a back door to a yard where Travis kept his bicycle and did his homework on Sunday afternoons. Hazel volunteered at the bookshop on the evenings June Whitlock could not work, and at the diner 3 days a week during the summer months, when the truckers came through more heavily. Logan stepped down from day to day at the company and took the chair of the board. He spent his mornings in Riverbend reading legal histories he had never had the time for, and his afternoons writing letters to his mother and his sister. His mother, who had visited Riverbend twice, and who had, on the second visit, been seen to laugh helplessly while Marigold demonstrated, at the diner counter, the correct way to flip a pancake on a flat-top grill, had become, to her own considerable surprise, fond of the town. On a Tuesday afternoon in late October, on the day of Joan's birthday, Logan walked into Marigold's at the slow hour. The diner was quiet. Carl had taken the evening off for a nephew's wedding. Joan was at her usual booth, with her birthday slice of pie that Marigold had insisted on, and a small bouquet of asters from her own garden that Travis had brought over as a present. Earl was at the counter reading the paper. Hazel was in the back hallway. Logan could hear her voice and Marigold's voice from the kitchen, low and easy, talking about the order for the Christmas pageant cookies and whether Travis was going to be a shepherd again this year, now that he had grown 4 inches. Logan walked through the diner. He pushed open the green door at the back. He walked down the narrow hallway with its smell of bleach and lemon. He walked past the door on the left with the silhouette of a man and the door on the right with the silhouette of a woman. He turned into the kitchen. Hazel was at the prep counter beside Marigold, sleeves pushed to her elbows, laughing at something Marigold had just said, with a streak of flour on her cheek, and her hair tied back with the same pale blue cotton band she had worn the morning he had found her. She looked up. She saw him. She smiled. "I was hoping you'd be here," he said. She set down the wooden spoon she was holding. She wiped her hands on her apron. She walked across the small kitchen, and she put her arms around her husband's waist, and she put her cheek against his chest. And she stood there for a long moment, in the bright, quiet, warm kitchen of Marigold's diner, in the small town of Riverbend, where she had once knelt on a folded towel beside a chipped tile floor, and looked up at the door and hoped, for one more season, that he would not come. "I was hoping," she said, "for the rest of my life." If you have stayed with us through this story, please leave a comment with the moment that touched you most, and tap the like button, and subscribe to Platinum Diaries for a new story every week. Pull up your chair. Pour yourself something warm. We will be here.